Hey gang, last day of the Crowsnest Realignment. Let's get some track laid, some trains running, and we'll say goodbye to Tunnel 7. So let's start off with supplies. One of the most important things to track laying is straight edges. I've got a 4-foot chunk of plywood here, and I've got my little 1-foot level. I'm going to use both of those. Straight edge, very important. You want some foam brushes, start off with a half a dozen. You're going to need a soldering iron. We've got some tape here. This is 1/8 masking tape. That's going to be used for super elevation. I've got a pair of files, a round file and a wedge file. I've got a hobby knife for cutting off ties. I use a Dremel for cutting off my track. You can use snippers if you want. It's up to you. You want some good flux. You want a cheap old brush for applying that flux. And you want some decent solder. I glue my track down with latex contact. So I'm going to try and work this from both ends of this realignment. We're going to lay track from the west coming up the hill, but I got to get rid of tunnel 7 and put some road bed in here real quick first. So straight edge is screwed to the fascia, so I get a nice straight cut across the base of tunnel 7. This is going to be the surface of Summit Lake, so I want it even with both sides. We're going to pull out this scenery, get the road bed in real quick. I'm going to put cork down here while I'm laying track at the bottom end. So let's get at it here. I'm just going to quickly cut through the old main line here. This is a little further east of the location of the switch at Crowsnest, giving myself a little bit of headroom so I'm not dead set on where that switch has to be. I can move it one way or the other and then just replace the track with a chunk of flex. I'm going to get this ballast softened up here so I can get this track exposed, get the road bed exposed. So I'm just going to spritz on some warm soapy water, let it do its thing for a few minutes to scrape off that ballast. Then I can get at this road bed, make my cut, and tear the rest of this stuff out. I'm going to quickly set my last piece of road bed in place and get it ready for cork. In the meantime, I've got 1 coat of contact cement on this cork. That's important so that this tape we're using for super elevation has something to stick to. Now you want to determine the end of your curve, and you want to go 8 inches back from there on your tangent. And that's where you're going to set your first piece of tape, tack it down there, and then you're going to work it down around the curve, obviously on the outside edge, all the way till you get to your next section of tangent, and you're going to go 8 inches beyond the curve there. Once you have that done, you're going to come back up, and you're going to start 4 inches closer to the curve with your second layer of tape. You're basically just tearing this up. I'm going to go with 4 layers. You can do whatever you want. This is somewhat slow track, so 4 layers is fine. I'm just going to set down a piece of track temporarily and test out the super elevation. I find using a double stack car works best, as it's going to show that super elevation off more than any other car. I'm going to smear another coat of contact over top of this tape, making sure I get it liberally applied to the edges. This is basically just to seal the tape in place. You don't want too much on there, obviously, but you want to make sure that it's done a good job of sealing that tape down so it can't go anywhere. All right, we'll get our first piece of track all gummed up with contact here. So it's just a simple dabbing motion. And the reason you want lots of these brushes is they'll start to stiffen up. You want a soft brush for this, and you obviously don't want to put too much on, otherwise you're going to bond that sliding rail to the tie strip. After our second coat of contact is dried on both the cork and the track, we're going to lay in our first piece of tangent here, right up to where the curve's going to start. Now I'm going to go on a tiny bit of a rant here. Use a straight edge for your straight track. The one thing that drives me nuts about the way people lay track is they don't spend the time to use a straight edge. You spend $1 gazillion on equipment and then you run it over wiggly track and it looks like crap. So take your time with this, use a straight edge, do it right. I'm going to use 4 new pieces of flex track for the 180-degree curve that we're coming into here. The way I prep my flex track is I'll cut 2 tie strips off of each end. You're going to want to save those tie strips. We're going to use them later to fill in the gaps. I'll then take my wedge file and I'll dress the ends of the rail. I'll do the inside against the bottom web and the outsides against the bottom web. I'll then flip the track over and do the bottom face as well. This just makes it easy to get the rail joiners on, but also eliminates any burrs that could be present, regardless of whether this is a factory piece or not. It still has to be done. Depending on which end I'm working from, I'll slide the joiners on. Of course, remember you want your sliding rail to the inside of your curve. I'll put the joiners on one end only, and it's important to do this step before you get the contact cement on so you're not getting your hands all gummed up. And again, that nice light dabbing motion, 2 coats of contact on the back of the flex track. We're going to start off by setting that joint, and then we're going to use our straight edge to make sure it's absolutely perfectly straight. Now the trick to laying a curve here is that you want to keep the tie strip just slightly above the cork and work it into that curve. Now I use Atlas track, so it's got that flexibility to it. Other brands are stiff and you have to pre-bend your curves, which is fine. That's not what I'm trying to demonstrate here. So I'll slowly pull that around, and if you haven't put too much contact on, it's still going to bend nice and free. You don't want to tack this down hard yet. You want it to be just touching the outside of the tape. Of course, it's going to be higher because of that super elevation. And make sure you spend a pile of time here eyeballing things, get it right. A really good trick is to put 3 passenger cars together, run them over top of this curve. If they start wiggling around, you have to adjust your curve. I'm going to use the straight edge and check on my transition into the curve off the outside edge here. This is more of an eyeball thing, and once you get used to this, you can get pretty good at it. You're going to tack the track down now by passing your finger over it. Make sure you leave about 4 to 6 inches at the opposite end loose. It's important for the next step. I'm just going to square off this end with the Dremel, and then I'm going to dress it with the file, make sure that it's going to be easy to get the next piece butted into this. Now remember, we've left that 4 to 6 inches loose on that end that's already started to be tacked down here. We're going to butt in our next piece, and we're going to ensure that that joint is nice and straight. Then you can brush on some flux to the outside of the rail, and you're just going to tap it with some heat and some solder, and in essence, you're going to make continuous welded rail here. Once you've got a nice solid joint, you're just going to pull this track down around the radius, much like the rest of the curve. When you get to the next joint, repeat the same process. Once you've got your track laid, I like to go back in and fill in the gaps. So I'll take the tie strips that I've cut off, I'll take a knife and I'll slice off the spike heads. Then you just take a round file, you drop it into that groove where the rail was, and you just make that groove a little deeper. Then this is going to slip right underneath your rail without interfering with the rail joiner. When slipping your strips underneath a super elevated joint, make sure that you go from the super elevation in, not the opposite way around. Otherwise, there's a chance that you're going to get those ties caught up on the tape and possibly knock your alignment out slightly. Right, we're going to get set up for a Tortoise at the east end here. I've got a switch control module and a switch control panel, both by Signalogics, and a Tortoise. Now, I mount my Tortoises to a block of 1/2 inch plywood, and then it's just a simple matter of holding in place and driving 2 screws up into the roadbed versus trying to line up that Tortoise. If you time things out right with this 2-front approach, you could get a lot more done. So as I was laying track on the lower level, I was also getting the cork in on the upper level. I'm now just turning my attention to getting the main line put in. The Tortoise is in place, the switch is in place. I'm going to wire in my switch control panel, test out this switch for functionality, and then I can get the siding laid. Of course, before we can open this section up to revenue service, we're going to have to get the ballast train up and over top of the track. Rumor has it that SAR's business car fleet, along with a partner railroad's business cars and some private varnish, are going to make an appearance at the opening ceremonies for the first revenue train through here. There might even be cake.
Cake.
Well, now that those two have heard that, I guess we're having cake. Really happy with how this turned out. It's going to give me a lot more scenic flexibility. I'm going to be able to include Michelle Creek as it flows down through this section westward towards Sparwood. I'll be able to address the problems around that telepost. I'm going to put a neat little canyon scene in there and a couple of bridges crossing over top of Michelle Creek. Up on the east end of the realignment, I'm going to be able to model Summit Lake and Crowsnest a lot more accurately, and operationally it makes a lot more sense. A few quick stats. I ended up putting in 52 feet of new roadbed, 75 feet of track. The siding went from 21.5 feet to 24 feet, and I gained 25 feet of extra mainline run. I am going to do a video on the first revenue train across here, but I'm going to need your help. So if you go to the channel page, to the community tab, I've set up a poll. I want you guys to all vote on which train you'd like to see as the first movement across this new section of track. Anyway, this one's all over. The tracks are in. I'm going to run the absolute snot out of this thing and address any problems that need to be addressed, and then get ripping away at roughed-in scenery. So thank you so much for watching, and we will see you in the next video.